Brewster here, new episode of Soloing Secrets, and this is Paul Kossoff, and I've had some requests to feature this legendary late great icon of the guitar, and I have featured Paul before in a 3-for-All episode, that was a few years ago. Also the Chordplay episode, The Chords of Free, which that's where most people associate or know Paul Kossoff from. Definitely a legendary guitarist from London, England, and his career started around 1968. Former member of the band Free, former member of the band Backstreet Crawler, former member of the band Black Cat Bones, and a bunch of session appearances and other, solo artists and some other appearances and stuff. Definitely a dynamite, very expressive, and just grab you by the throat, blues rock guitarist. A legend. So much like we've done in other episodes in the Soloing Secret series, when you're checking out a certain player or band, it's always a good idea to scope out their influences, which reveal certain things that pop up in their music, licks, and playing habits, and techniques and stuff. And with Paul, he definitely was a huge Clapton fan. And I find it really interesting that like in the early 70s, Clapton and Paul Kossoff were in the same room, and Clapton asked Paul to demonstrate his vibrato technique. So that was literally Paul Kossoff's hero asking him, hey, let me see you, play vibrato. That would be like Eddie Van Halen asking me to show him how I tap or something. It's like, what? That had to have been mind-blowing. But aside from Clapton, you got the Three Kings, you've got Peter Green, and some essential guitarists right here. So Paul Kossoff tragically died like in the mid-70s, and he's yet another rock and roll tragedy. But it's really interesting to notice, some of the people that he worked with and performed with, in his career, even though it was kind of cut short. But here's an image with some of the people that Paul Kossoff worked with in his life and his career. And then as far as the soloing secrets of Mr. Paul Kossoff, there's a lot. There's blues influences, so you've got this modified kind of blues phrasing, various pentatonic scales, weaving between minor and major pentatonic, extremely expressive bending and vibrato. I just mentioned the Clapton connection with his vibrato. Definitely Paul Kossoff was known for his real throaty vibrato technique. And bending, unison bends, compound bends, oblique bends, double stop bends. He was bending like crazy everywhere. But anyway, here's Paul Kossoff's elusive soloing secrets. And as far as the music featured in this episode, I basically pulled from 4 Paul Kossoff related albums. That's 3 free albums, and then also the Backstreet Crawler album the band plays on. So just a heads up. Alright, with the opening jam, that's the song Remember from the free album Fire and Water, which is on the wall right there. And I always love this guitar solo. It's got this lazy, kind of behind the beat feel. Really cool. And I was basically using the MXR clone looper there to kind of help me out with the backing. You distinctly hear a guitar doing this. Like in the background, that's like A7 to a D9 right there. And then you hear a bass, and I also looped a bass in there too, like the... Something like that. That's kind of like a combination of things that you're going to hear the bassist do in the song, because he was moving and grooving all over the place, and I had to find kind of a generic, like 4 or 8 bar, version of what he played. So that's kind of what I came up with. You've got that A7 to D9, and then that... something like that. And then you distinctly hear the solo start right here, and Paul does this. And he basically does this really lazy, slow bend on that B note. So, we're basically in A for this, right? And he's basically starting his solo in A major pentatonic, and then he's going to shift to minor pentatonic in a second. So think of A major pentatonic right there. And he's doing... and that really slow bend, which I love that. And then you answer that with... so right there, do that same hammer-on move. And then a kind of a quick bend on that B and end on that F sharp. And then you're going to transport back here to this E on the B string. Like that. this is really cool. So he's doing kind of a raked, sweep into that high A right there. And then you're going to come over and hop over to that E note on the B string, and then hop over to that C note on the G. Like that. Really cool raked kind of sweep on that A minor right there. So after that opening, basically add some vibrato to that A note, then hop back here and think of A major pentatonic down there, lazily bend that B note up to C sharp, catch that E like that, where you're bending that B note, catch that E with your pinky and release that bend, go down to that A, grab that F sharp, add some vibrato and slide it off, and then you hear him catch this A right there. Now he's moving into A minor pentatonic. As soon as he does that, he does that, like that. And he's basically doing kind of an oblique bend. And then he starts doing these pull-offs. And then he starts doing like a double stop right there, kind of slightly bent 3 times. And then 2 A's and slide off the second A. He starts doing this really weird oblique bend here, almost like a country bend. And then, so right there, that weird oblique bend, you're holding the 17th on the B and the high E, and you're going to start with it bent up. Like that, where you're literally bending the B string, and it's 2 notes there held on the 17th fret. And then come down like that, and then you've got kind of a double stop, hammer on right there, and then he starts doing this weird milked bend on this D note. So you're literally kind of moving back and forth like a whole step. And that last time you want to end on that D note. Then he starts doing that pull off 4 times again. And right there you're going to catch this G and bend that up to A. And then this kind of smear bend on that C into that A note. And then I kind of ended it like or something like that. And it keeps going. There's a little bit more to it after that. But I really like that kind of lazy, behind the beat, slow bending, and intense vibrato at moments. And he's moving between major and minor pentatonic, which is really eye-opening and really cool to see. Okay, next up's an example from the song Moonshine. This came from the free album Tons of Sobs. And definitely Paul Kossoff is well known for his vibrato technique, like I mentioned earlier. And this is a great example, a good example for you to kind of dive in and kind of check it out for yourself. So this lick, or melody, appears multiple times in this song. It actually happens right before the guitar solo, and this would be over A minor, right? And he's basically doing this. It's not really hard to play, it's just very intense. One more time. So we're just cruising up the G string right there, kind of playing with A minor pentatonic, and we're also hitting the flat 5 in there for a moment. But just do a hammer on into that A note and grab that A note with authority. Then you're going to shift slide that A to C and grab that C with authority there. C to D and do it again. Now right here we're going to move from D to E flat, and I usually switch to my middle finger because that's setting us up for the bending lick at the end. But that D to E flat with authority, and then that E flat to E, right? Then he does a raked, kind of sweep pick into that E note, and then he also catches that high D, like that. So you're raking into the E, and then you're going to rake into that D note and bend it. And then catch the C note back there, and then end on that E note again. And I don't know know what it is about that lick or that melody, it just really grabs your attention, like, hey, check this out. Okay, next up, this is also from the song Moonshine. This is the opening of the guitar solo. So right before this lick, you're going to hear that kind of intense vibrato melody that I just showed you right here. And then you hear the start of the solo somewhere in the middle of the song, like this. One more time. Something like that. So we're starting with that A note, then you're going to basically grab that D. So you're really just playing with 3 notes right there, but he's saying so much with just 3 notes like that. And then you're going to basically grab that C to D and then bend that D to E with no vibrato. And then you want to bend that D to E again with vibrato. And then he starts doing this kind of release, like it's a half step, then a whole step, half step, and a whole step with that bend. Like that. So you're going to basically do that bend up a whole step with vibrato. Then you want to release that bend to a half step. And you're playing with that, you know, that E flat and that E, but you're doing it with the bend. That. You know, something like that. Really expressive and really demanding bending lick there from Paul Kossoff. Next up's a lick from the song Walk in My Shadow. This is also from the free album Tons of Sobs, and it's something like this. One more time. Now we're in G, right? And think of G minor pentatonic right there. And we're going to grab that D note, bend the C up to D, grab that D again there. You're going to basically do the D, bend that C to D, pick that D twice, and then grab that F. And then after you pick that D twice, grab that F, and then bend that F to G, right? Then you're going to do an F to D pull off and then grab that C note and bend that to D. And then you want to do that pull off again, grab that C note and then bend to that D note 3 times. Then you're going to do this kind of quick bend and release from that, you know, D, that C up to D, back to C, and then that B flat to G right there 3 times. So really slow. And then a tempo right there. Next up's the opening of the solo to the song I'll Be Creepin'. This is from the free album Free, and now we're in B, and we're doing something like this. One more time. So right there, we're going to start on that B note. You're going to kind of smear bend that D on the B string, and you're doing this. So you're kind of doing the same thing twice in a row. And then you're going to bend this E to F sharp, and you're doing this. So you're going to bend that E to F sharp and pick it twice, and then bend the E to F sharp, pick it twice, and then E to F sharp and pick it once. Like that. And then he does this really cool, and that's kind of a signature lick from Paul Kossoff right there. Like that, really tasty bending phrase there. So you got... Next Next up's a lick from the song Hoodoo Woman. This came from the Backstreet Crawler album The Band Plays On, and we're in the key of A again, and we're doing something like this. One more time. Something like that. So we're in A. Think of that minor pentatonic position there. In A minor pentatonic. And he's doing this kind of like abrupt staccato kind of phrasing. It's kind of choppy. And then... And he holds on to that last A before that final slide there. But one more time. And it's just this tight, like really intense phrasing, and like in the groove of the song, it just sits like a certain way. Next up's the opening to the first solo in the song Train Song, and this is also from the Backstreet Crawler album The Band Plays On, and now we're in the key of E, and we're doing something like this. One more time. Like that. So we're starting with another rake kind of sweep into this high A right there, and you're going to bend that A up to B. So bend that A up to B with that rake, you know, kind of strum, and then that G to A, and then that E back to that G. Okay, you're doing that. And then after you do the vibrato on that E, you just kind of smear that G note. And then you do a lazy slide into this E. Lazily slide into that E, grab that G back to that E with vibrato. Then you do a really lazy bend on this A up to B, and you very slowly release it. And then G to A back to E. And then you do this G and slide off that E note on the D string. Like that. So really slow. Something like that, and then a little faster. Tons of attitude sitting right there. Really cool. Last but not least is another lick from the song Train Song. This takes place during like the main solo, and it's this cool like kind of slid flat five bluesy phrase like this. Once again, we're in the key of E, and once again right there. So there we're smear bending that D into E right there. Catch that E note, go back to D, grab B, and then you're going to shift slide down to B flat. And then you're going to catch this A note. Then you hop over and grab the high E right there on the high E string. And then you're going to smear bend that G. So you're doing this. And you're going to smear bend that G and then end with that E, D, E at the end. Cool, and I love finding like different ways of throwing the flat five in there. And that song definitely has a groove to it, so that lick has a groove too. You know, like that. Cool lick. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets with this look at Paul Kossoff. And I've mentioned this in recent episodes. You know, it seems like the band Free is really just known for one song, All Right Now. And it seems like Paul Kossoff is kind of associated with that one song. And that really bothers me when an artist or a writer or like a film director or something is just kind of summed up in one example, like one album or one book or one movie or whatever it is. And that bothers me because Paul Kossoff did a lot more than just play All Right Now. You know, it's a great classic song. It's been shown like a million times. And you probably noticed I avoided that song in this lesson because I wanted to dive deeper and kind of unearth, you know, some different ideas and licks from Paul. And that's something I feel like everybody watching this should do. Don't just accept what's on the greatest hits or what's on a classic rock radio station or whatever. Dig around and find your own favorite music or bands or guitarists. You never know what you might uncover just digging around and checking out some music that maybe you've never heard before or an album you've never heard before. And with Paul Kossoff, his playing is so expressive and interesting. You know, it's a shame a lot of people have no idea who he is in today's world. That's why I made this lesson in this video. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.